Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We have Daniel with us almost every week to talk about what's really going on in the world of geopolitics. Welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you back again.
Thanks for having me, Jay. I apologize. My voice is a little bit rough.
It sounds pretty good to me. I sort of really empathize with you, though, because I've had to do radio shows at a time when I've had some real severe colds, and it's not a lot of fun. So we'll try to be we'll try to reduce the time you need to torture your voice. I don't think it sounds that bad, actually, so don't worry about that. I'm more concerned about you. All right, well, there are 3 or 4 articles at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity over the last week that I'd like you to chat about a little bit, if you could, just sort of pass them on, the essence of those articles to our listeners. And 3 of which you've written, and the last one your boss, Ron Paul, has written. The first one is... it's titled, "Well Done, Hillary, Islamists Are Swimming in Our Pool." And it starts out by saying, "Images from Libya today speak more clearly about the folly of U.S. interventionism, U.S. regime change operations, U.S.-led bombing campaigns to promote democracy than anything else." So here we have our property, U.S. property, being overtaken by our enemies, and they're swimming and enjoying themselves to no end in our pool. So tell our listeners, just summarize your article. Well done, Hillary.
Well, I reposted this on Blue Rockwell's site, and I felt that I had to put an asterisk after the pool to explain that it's our pool only in the sense that the money was stolen from us to build it in the embassy complex. So I didn't want to sound collectivist there, but the fact of the matter is all of these lavish embassies with the workout rooms and the Burger Kings and the pools and everything, they're all paid for by us, and the people that populate these embassies are not really representing our interests. What they're doing is doing things like the regime change that happened in Libya, the attack on Libya that happened 3 years ago, that we were told was going to bring a new era of democracy. The Arab Spring was blazing through Africa, and we had to get rid of this horrible dictator, Gaddafi, so that the wonderful forces of democracy would break through. And look at Libya today. It's absolute chaos. There are warring gangs. Some are supported by one faction of Islamists, and others supported by others. The regional players like the United Arab Emirates and Egypt are bombing Libya, or bombing different factions in Libya. The U.S. has hightailed it out of Libya a few weeks ago. They sort of had to leave in disgrace, I would say, although the media didn't play it that way. But here's the U.S. promising that things would be fantastic if only we could bomb Libya. And now they have to run off with their tail between their legs because the country is too dangerous for them to even be involved in, to even have an embassy in.
Yeah. And
I think really the cherry on top is this picture, this video that I posted in the article, of these groups of Islamist militia men frolicking and swimming and in our pool and enjoying the weight room in the facility of the embassy, et cetera, et cetera. So here is the huge chasm between what they promise us when they try to convince us that we need to support an intervention and the reality after the intervention, which is always chaos. Are always worse than even when they started, even by their own standards. So
and it seems as though Hillary Clinton was really the one that wanted to bomb the hell out of Libya. She was really, apparently, Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who's then the U.S. ambassador to the UN, was really, Secretary Robert Gates at that time, Defense Secretary, opposed it, but Hillary went for it, huh?
Oh, Hillary, and it was the then U.S. ambassador to the UN was Susan Rice.
Oh, okay,
and, Susan Rice is one of the so-called humanitarian interventionists.
Oh, yeah, she cares about people. She
cares
kills.
about mankind, and so she's the one who framed the attack on Libya in the terms of, I saw the slaughter in Rwanda, and I promised myself I would never let it happen again. And so this was This was how she got on board a lot of, sadly, some progressives and really the other side of the neocons, the left neocons,
Mm-hmm.
got them on board with this. But this was Hillary's baby. And of course, the Republicans missed the point because they support intervention.
Right.
So even though this is the greatest example of Hillary Clinton's incompetence, the Republicans will never frame it the right way because they actually support this.
Mm-hmm.
Their only complaint would be that she didn't go far enough. They didn't level the entire country and kill everyone. That's the problem the Republicans have.
Gee. Well, but Hillary Clinton, then I suppose her incompetence makes her just the right person to become our next president.
Well, that may be true, and you actually may see, depending on who the Republicans run, you may see a lot of Democrats going over to Hillary's side, especially the neocons. The Weekly Standard crowd has already they ran an article last week, I think, written by Hillary. And it was sort of, they thought it was cute. They said, "Yeah, you got it right. We're running something by Hillary Clinton." So they don't have a problem with her at all.
Well, it's incredible. They don't have a problem with her at all. They don't have a problem. What do these people expect? That to kill everybody and then take over their land and have their resources? Is that the idea? I mean, I just don't get it. But I guess it seems to me that's the direction we're going. One world government. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, another article, NATO to ship weapons to Kiev, but don't call it escalation. And actually, this was one I tweeted out to my list, to my followers today, Daniel, because I thought it was so good. Talk to our listeners about this. We are, of course, we're not the aggressors. We're the good guys. Everybody knows by now that Putin is the devil incarnate, and he is the guy that's aggressing. We don't aggress anywhere. No, it's Putin that is trying to keep the Chinese from developing a navy to protect their own sea lanes. No, it's Putin who is who's doing all these bad things. So NATO is shipping weapons to Kiev, but of course we're doing it just to promote democracy and peace and tranquility, right, Daniel?
Yeah, this is I wrote this right after the U.S. condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which the U.S. claims was, I think, over 1,000 Russians invaded Ukraine, although they couldn't come up with a single photograph of these Russians who were invading Ukraine. And they were, I think, 10 paratroopers who Russia claimed had made a wrong turn. Who knows what happened? But and I'm forgetting now an article that we ran. Someone said, "Well, what about the other 990? How can we even take a simple photograph of these people?" Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't Russians fighting, or there weren't Russians fighting across the border in Ukraine. But I think it's also important to remember that in many cases, you have family ties. The borders in that part of the region are very arbitrarily drawn. And it was all one country not that awfully long ago, if you remember when it was the USSR.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have families divided. You do have people, there are ethnic Russians on both sides. And so you have that. And so people have gone over to fight. And also, hey, okay, maybe the Russians are involved. Maybe they are sending things. We haven't seen any proof, and I don't trust the government. I certainly don't trust people like NATO Secretary General Rasmussen, whose incendiary claims are never backed by facts. But even if it's all true, what the U.S. never talks about is the fact that it and NATO are escalating it to the 10th degree, to the nth degree, by sending in weapons, by sending in advisors, possibly by sending in special forces. At this NATO summit, they talked about a 10,000 person strong military rapid response team that will be located on Russia's border. They talked about bases in the Baltics, and also 5 NATO member countries at last week's NATO summit in Wales agreed to provide high-tech military gear, deadly military gear to the government in Ukraine. So why is that not an escalation? Why, if it's wrong for outside powers, for Russia as an outside power to intervene, then why is it not wrong for the U.S. and NATO to intervene on the other side?
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
the disconnect.
well,
And
that's because we're the good guys and they're
I
the
was
bad
just going
guys.
to say that. I mean, literally, you could be the State Department spokesman, Jay, just by
Yeah.
saying that. All you have to do is go before the camera and say that over and over again, and that's the explanation.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
there. Yeah, I see a couple of responses to Ron Paul to this article that you wrote, Daniel. A guy named Matt Lee. He says U.S. military exercises in Ukraine not provocative because we aren't the ones who have taken escalatory military action. Russia has.
yeah, that was not Matt Lee writing that. Matt Lee is actually a very, very good reporter from AP.
Oh.
Asked tough questions. He was retweeting something that the U.S. State Department spokesman
Oh, okay.
said.
My apologies.
No. But it was funny because it's almost exactly what you said a minute ago.
Yeah.
That was the State Department response.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, do Americans realize that we used our clandestine means to unseat the elected government of the Ukraine?
Well, it was clandestine, and then it became very overt. Clandestine was the 10 years leading up to this, and actually several years before, was the $5 billion that Victoria Nuland proudly claimed that we had spent on overthrowing the government in Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
That was the covert side. That was the funding of the NGOs, the secret money, the suitcases of money that went in. But then when the actual coup happened, it was very overt. How many times was John McCain on the streets of Kiev encouraging these people who were throwing firebombs at police officers? Can you imagine at John McCain's home state of Arizona if there had been a gang like this threatening the government there? So it was plenty of U.S. lawmakers were in the streets as part of the protest. Victoria Nuland, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, was famously handing out cookies and rolls to the protesters. We overtly supported the overthrow of the government, and what no news media here wants to report is that is what set these horrific, deadly events into motion.
Right, and if we back up a little bit, Daniel, I recall you telling me a little bit about the economics too. That in fact, that Russia had offered the Yanukovych, who was later deposed. Russia had offered him a much better financial deal for the country than what NATO was trying to entice him or provide for him. Right?
Yeah, actually, it was the EU that offered
The EU. Okay.
Ukraine an associate agreement. Which it may have had some benefits, but on
balance,
the president decided that the Russian offer was better. Ukraine's trade with Russia at the time was was much more than it was with Europe, and the EU is a protectionist entity anyway. So the idea that they would be importing a lot of pretty mediocre Ukrainian manufactured goods is unlikely, whereas Russia, had need for them.
Sure.
So, it was judged this way, and the U.S. and NATO and the EU decided that it was time to move. What's interesting is the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the U.S. government-funded regime change, so-called NGO. They're the ones that go into these countries and foment the unrest that leads to regime change. Well, the president of the NED, who has been in power in the NED for like 25 or 30 years, if not longer, he said that, quote, Ukraine is the prize for the West. So he wrote this in an op-ed a couple of years ago. So they've been pushing for this for a long time. They were successful. They overthrew the government. And then, like every other intervention, instead of democracy and prosperity breaking out, it caused chaos. It caused a war, a horrible, bloody war in the East, where I think some 3,000 people have been killed.
Okay, Daniel, could it have a lot to do with the flow of hydrocarbons from Russia to Europe? Because it seems to me that this is another issue that is never talked about here, but that Biden's son actually has a very top-level job, supposedly, I believe, with an energy company in Ukraine now. Is that right?
He does. He's on the board of the largest energy company in Ukraine, which is reportedly owned by one of the big Ukrainian oligarchs. He's actually a Ukrainian-Israeli oligarch who has his own private army in Ukraine. And this I think is another one of the neocon fantasies that they can extract the EU from Russia, from dependence on Russia for energy, and by doing that, they can isolate Russia and bring down Russia, which is their real goal.
Yeah.
But the idea is to exploit a lot of the trapped hydrocarbons in Ukraine through the use of the hydraulic fracturing, the fracking, and that itself will loosen up enough energy so that these countries don't have to be as reliant on Russia. So it's a big scheme on their part, and what they're doing is they're literally playing with the lives of millions of Europeans, because if it doesn't pan out in all of their destruction of relations between the EU and Russia, there's going to be a lot of poor average folks like us over there who are freezing this winter, to pay for the yet another mistake by the neocons.
Yeah. Well, it's all about economics. It seems to me that's pretty true. But your idea is that there are elements within the neocons that really want to stop at nothing short of taking away the sovereignty of Russia, I guess.
Well, that's the prize. They can't stand the idea that there is any country out there that's not, quote, in our bloc.
Yeah.
And if you look at the interventions against the relative small fries up until now, the Syrias, the Libyas, the Iraqs, these were all guys who refused to sign on the dotted line to be loyal puppets of the empire. And so those people who resisted have been overthrown. And Russia and China are certainly on the list, but unfortunately for the rest of the world, these are larger fish. These are fish that have nuclear weapons, and so the neocons and the crazed interventionists are bringing us to the brink of World War III, of destruction of all mankind for their insane, crazy schemes.
Yeah, it's frightening, and it just goes to remind you how far we've departed from our roots as a country, as a nation who wasn't supposed to be entangled in the affairs of other nations. And what we could have if we had just stuck to our Constitution instead of what is happening. But I think there's other issues that are at play too, Daniel. As I look at the economy as a whole, huge amounts of indebtedness that cannot be repaid. It seems to me that this is like a frightened, injured monster after 2008, 2009 that needs to grab as much more food as it can geopolitically and around the globe, has to go in and continue to find sources of revenue from one place or another. Individually, the corporations are doing that to try to satisfy their shareholders, whether it's weapon makers or oil companies or whatever. But it's I think because we've gotten ourselves in so much debt that's part of the issue too. But anyway, I editorialize, and I want to get to you the third article I'd like to ask you about. And this has to do with people. I think we forget how many countries we are killing people in now. How many countries we're dropping bombs. America is dropping bombs in various places. But you wrote an article on the 2nd of September. Don't blink, you'll miss another U.S. attack. U.S. bombs have been falling on Iraq, you say, for several weeks now, and an attack is also planned against Syria. At the NATO summit in Wales this weekend, it was agreed to position thousands of troops on Russia's border to be prepared there for an attack in a moment's notice. There's no end to this. I mean, talk about this article. There's various places that we're involved in, and not just those two places.
Sure. Well, it was what I was writing about is that nobody was looking to U.S. Bomb Somalia, the night before, and it's as if these are just minor events that they're of no importance. The fact that drones sweep in and drop missiles that cause great damage. They're often, as you know, they're often off target, and they kill a lot of thousands and thousands of innocent civilians. But they just pass as a little footnote in the media. It's just incredible. And I said I had a little fun because I said it seems like it was only yesterday that the U.S. attacked Pakistan. And then I said, oh, wait, it was only yesterday. And I linked to the fact that the U.S. had bombed Pakistan the day before.
Mm.
So
Never makes our news even.
No, nobody even questions it.
And we are using bombs, dropping bombs in so many places now that we've become so, I think, deadened to the notion that we're killing people. We don't care. We don't care as a nation anymore that we're killing people, or because they're brown-skinned or something different than us.
Sure. Well, I might be willing to consider the wisdom of it if they could show me after how many years, 13 years after 9/11, if they can show me that they've made any progress, that things are better. No,
yeah.
In fact, it's even worse. You know, they tell us that not only is it worse, there's a group that's a million times worse than Al-Qaeda that's emerged that we all have to mobilize against.
Yeah, they're giving us pictures of beheadings now on
so
the internet.
They're telling us that their tactics have been a disaster. They've not produced any security. On the contrary, they've made us much less secure. So how do they justify continuing to do what they've done that's messed things up in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's the definition of insanity. Continue to do the same thing and expect different results. But Daniel, this to me is just like what we see on the economics, in the economic picture in the United States, the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. It's the same thing. We keep doing the same thing since the 1930s. In the 1930s, it did not work, and we're doing the same thing now, printing more and more money faster and faster, and all it does is creates more chaos, more indebtedness, more depression, economic depression, and yet we don't learn. I don't have an answer for this. Why can Americans be so stupid? I mean, how can we get it so wrong? And I have to think it's because there's some force out there that's bigger than us that is driving this thing. But you have, all these fantastic people with PhDs from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale that are telling us this is the right way to go. So how could we common folks ever question those brilliant minds, right?
No, you're right, Jay, to make parallels because they should be made. It's absolutely the same on the foreign affairs front. You have John McCain. He's the one who's invited to all these shows every week to talk on these shows.
Yeah, the talk shows on Sunday and so forth.
Exactly. He's the guy whose advice has gotten us into this absolute disastrous mess, and he's still considered the expert. And so it's the same in the financial world. Absolutely. The same people who made the mess are called on by the media to tell us all about, their next big scheme.
Well, you concluded this article by saying it's hard to understand how there is any legal justification for the Obama administration to conduct airstrikes on Africa at all. Has Congress declared war on Somalia? And my thought to that when I read that was, yeah, but Daniel, we have stopped declaring war. We go to war all the time. And that brought me to this notion of the Imperial Presidency. Your boss, Ron Paul, wrote an excellent article that's posted, I think, still today at the Ron Paul Institute, Nixon's Vindication. I remember very clearly when Nixon went down and how the left, at least, was very, very outspoken about how evil this man was, that we don't have an imperial presidency. We have a country that is by the people and for the people, not this sort of, dictatorial situation that Nixon was doing. Nixon made some statements that if the president does something, it's not a crime. But walk us through Ron Paul's article, Nixon's Vindication, if you would, Daniel.
Well, the line that Dr. Paul wrote that I really enjoyed in the piece, above all, was the last two presidents have abused their power in ways that would have made Nixon blush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even Nixon. Yeah.
Yeah. And Dr. Paul's point is, look how far we've come since just then. The sort of semi-forced resignation of Nixon was all about the abuse of presidential power. But the things that Nixon did, he would be called a wimp these days.
Right.
Would have been. What is your problem? You need to really be a stronger president. And Dr. Paul points out a couple of the reasons why Congress is so acquiescent to this executive usurpation of power, and the first reason he points out is that politicians place loyalty to their party above loyalty to the Constitution.
Right.
So if their president is in power, they'll excuse anything that he does. But he points out another very important reason why Congress is so accepting of the imperial presidency, which is the aggressive foreign policy of the United States. You have to have a strong executive if you're going to be at war with the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He has to have unchecked power. And as Dr. Paul points out, when the Republicans are in office, they're called neoconservatives. When the Democrats are in power, they're called humanitarian interventionists. But it's really the same thing. And so, in essence, both parties agree on this, and you have to have a strong president to have a constant wartime president. So there's the bottom line.
Yeah, and it's the shame of it all is that you see that President Obama is being blamed by the neocons for being too soft and not taking things far enough. And you can just see you can see what's shaping up for the next presidential campaign, it seems to me. And most Americans who don't think through these things far enough and look deeply enough at what's really going on can be so easily swayed to move from one side to the other, or at least enough of them will be. So to me, you're going to get a neocon. I think most likely we're going to get another neocon president. It's going to be either a Hillary type on the left from the Democratic Party, or somebody like a McCain type from the Republican Party. There will be enough Americans, I believe, that will say, well, yeah, we're probably having more trouble now because we didn't do enough. We didn't kill enough people. We didn't, as you say, the neocons would like to just wipe everybody out of the country and then take over. But I don't know, and I suppose that there's some truth to that. I mean, if you can just keep taking nations up to a point, taking nations away and capturing their raw materials, I suppose that the parasitic beast can survive a little longer, perhaps. But what is going to happen to us, Daniel, when this thing comes to an end? Because what happens if my theory is right? What happens when the parasitic beast runs out of food to eat, and he can no longer service his debt?
Well, then the big question becomes, how do we get all of our gold out of this country without being caught crossing the border?
Yeah, but what country to go to? Because the parasitic beast wants to own the whole world. So I don't know. I mean, these are very fascinating times, very dangerous times, I think. And I just want to applaud you and Ron Paul and people who support the Ron Paul Institute, because I just think that what you're doing here, Daniel, is getting to the bottom of what's really going on as opposed to the superficial coverage we get from the mainstream media. And I want to thank you so much for your efforts along those lines, and also would like to appeal to my listeners to contribute what they can to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity if you think that it's important to know the truth about what your government is doing. If you don't think that, then okay, go ahead. Just put your head in the sand and watch some television and have fun, enjoy life, get drunk, whatever you like to do. But if you're really serious about the future of our country and about your family, and if you really think that our nation's politics, geopolitics are important, then, and if you have a conscience, consider donating some money and helping the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity as frugal, very, very frugally operated organization. Daniel, I know I've known you for many years, and I know you're not living in luxurious splendor. You're a very middle-class kind of existence, and really looking to help people understand what's really going on. I want to thank you very much again for coming on the show. Look forward to doing it again next week.
Thank you so much, Jay.